Hello and welcome to the ManageIQ Sprint 149 review. This was a regular 2-week sprint. I'll provide the overview. Harpreet will update us on the UI, Adam on the providers, Jovi on the platform, and Alberto on the API. So this sprint we had a total of 340 pull requests opened. A lower number merged to 11 than the previous two sprints, but still higher than every other sprint. So the activity from all the newer contributors, especially from IBM, is really showing its effect here. In terms of the breakdown of the pull requests by enhancements and bugs, etc., we saw a marked decrease in enhancements and bugs and a bunch of stuff on the test side. I got to see why those numbers are showing the way they are. I'll correct it for next time. They seem to be in the wrong boxes a lot here. All right, this is the health of the core repositories, and here's the health of the provider repositories. And with that, I will turn it over to Harpreet.
Thank you, Oleg. Hello, everyone. Total of 33 PRs were merged in UI repos, about the same as the last sprint. Out of that, 9 enhancements, 7 bug fixes, and some technical debt and React conversion related PRs, and few ITIN related fixes that went in, as well as number of accessibility related PRs were merged. All these PRs do not have any visible changes to show. I have a couple of slides to go over, and then we have a demo by Libor for provider tag mapping work that he did during last sprint, but he was unavailable to present due to a holiday in Brno. So he will go after I'm done with my slides. With that, next slide, please. A provider column was added to configured systems list view. Next slide, please. Changes were made to set the global carbon theme to G10 and set it to G90 for navigation menus. As you can see in before and after screenshots here, some visible differences are there. The search bar in the menu is brighter and more visible now, and the focus color is on the menus is changed to blue, which is more visible. Next slide, please. A fix was made on the configuration summary screen to display the missing icons in the relationships box for configuration profiles and providers if those are available. And with that, over to Libor.
Thank you. As Harpreet mentioned that we enhanced the provider tag mapping. Provider tag mapping is a rule specifying transfer of provider labels to ManageIQ tags with relations to resource like instance of virtual machine. Mapping is defined by a scope or entity, resource label, and target category. Scope specifies a provider or a resource where mapping will be applied. Resource label will specify which provider labels will be mapped, and target category is a destination where provider labels will be placed as a text in ManageIQ. We did changes in scope, target category, and in deletion of mapping. Originally, when a mapping is defined, it was required to select a provider or resource as a scope for mapping. Newly, we can just select all entities option, which means that mapping will be applied on all providers and all resources. Basically, all new enhancements here are related to all entities option. Change in a target category is that originally target category was created when mapping was created, but with all entities option, no category is created and existing category needs to be selected for the mapping. And when mapping was deleted, Then also all related objects like tag category, tags, and relations between tags and resources were deleted, and newly only mapping is removed when all entities option is used. This extends usability of mapped labels because we can use them in API, policy, basically everywhere where managed text are used. Let's take a look on UI changes and then on the demo. Next slide, please. We added a new option, all entities, and new select box to select existing tag category on the right side. And we can take a look on demo on the next slide.
Here?
No, next slide.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. Yes, first take a look on instance and check labels. In this demo, we are going to map labels environment with value production to tags. We can see that there are no tags assigned yet on this instance. Let's go to mapping UI through advanced settings and region, tags tab, and maps tag tab. Let's add mapping with all entities option and use environment label and select, for example, customer tag category. To see differences, let's add also mapping with original version. Let's use instance Amazon. Let's use same label environment and enter name of category which will be created during mapping creation. So we have mapping edit. You can see that there is a warning here which is saying that when mapping with all entities is used, then mapping process can replace assigned tags. And let's take a look back on instance. And we can see that there are no tags yet because we need to refresh. And we are expecting that label with name environment and production value will be mapped on tags for this instance. And after refresh, we can see two new tags. First is according to original mapping with prefix version. And the second is the tag created by mapping with all entities option. And that's it. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Libor.
Thanks, Libor. Oh, you gotta go again, Libor.
There we go. Should be better now.
All right, thanks. So for providers on Core, we're continuing the work to make the Core features more pluggable so that the UI can ask questions about which providers support different features as opposed to just assuming, for example, OpenStack supports pause. So there was some logic in the UI that was assuming that we've added features for the pause functionality as well as the create feature functionality. So now that the UI can just ask, hey, what providers support create flavors when they're looking to display the create flavor operation dropdowns. So we got those two features in, and that's unblocking some work on the UI. Keenan also looked at improving the consistency of saving child managers. So for most of the cloud managers, they have dependent child network and sometimes storage managers. There are some attributes that we need to keep in sync between all of these. For example, the zone, the region, and the tenant IDs all have to be synced. Each of the providers was doing this slightly differently. So Keenan added a method in Core to that all these providers can share so that we can get a consistent way of keeping all of these attributes in sync across all of the providers. So that should remove some of the kind of idiosyncrasies between doing this on the different providers. Some providers miss some columns, for example. So this should get us on a standardized way of doing that. Next slide. So there's some work on the UI to improve the cloud volumes screen. So a theme for some of these providers is we're improving the cloud volumes subclassing. Turned out that Google didn't have a subclass for cloud volumes. It was actually just using the base class. So we added a subclass for that under the Cloud Manager, and we added a schema change to do a data migration to upgrade any existing records in the database. OpenStack, we found that the cloud volumes were actually belonging to the storage Cinder manager, but their class name looked like they belonged to the Cloud Manager. So it was a little bit inconsistent. So we moved those under the storage Cinder manager, and also did another data migration to upgrade all of those types. There's an issue with some of the buttons on the NSXT provider where it was causing issues if you didn't have an NSXT provider added. So if you're trying to add for example, add a network router, it would hang on the UI because it was looking for an NSXT provider when really that button shouldn't have been shown. So we fixed the visibility of those buttons. So now if you don't have an NSXT provider for a button that requires one, the button will be grayed out. Next slide. And on the IBM Cloud side for Power, they updated the names of the network and storage managers to be consistent with the rest of ManageIQ. The name is built off of the parent Cloud Manager, and we have a consistent way of naming all of those for the rest of the providers. So IBM Cloud is now using the consistent naming scheme. We also were missing a network router subclass that was causing some exceptions on the UI. And on the IBM Cloud VPC side, we added power operations for VPC instances. So now you can start, stop, reboot, and hard reset VPC instances. We also now normalize the operating system names for instances and images so that you can see the icon properly on the UI for these instances, and fixed a couple of parser bugs for tags that didn't have value. So if it's just a key, the parser was blowing up doing the tag mapping. And now for the next slide, we have Chad to present a demo for the IBM Cloud VPC provider. Over to Chad.
All right, thanks, Adam. So I know this has been covered over the last few sprints, but I'll just walk through the quick demo of the IBM Cloud VPC. We can create a provider and specifying one of the existing regions in the VPC cloud and put in our API key, and we get the normal set of validation. And once we add the provider, we'll see the refresh happen over a small period of time here. So the refresh works, and we're discovering a handful of resources now. I think over time we'll add more, but right now we're covering images, instances, flavors, pretty much the primary ones for the Cloud Manager. Click into the instances, and we see the instance table with the appropriate amount of detail, power state, IP addresses, etc. We click into an instance, and we'll get more detail. We have the name and the description, of course, and the IP addresses. We can get information on the container or the flavor or instance size for this particular VPC instance. Similarly, we can get the operating system. As Adam mentioned, this is a recent enhancement where we can get both the operating system and the version information as well as grabbing the architecture on the instance. Of course, we're discovering all of the relationships and mapping those correctly. So things like availability zone are being discovered and managed, so we see the relationships are captured correctly between the availability zones and their respective instances and volumes. Similarly, for the flavor, we're capturing the details on the composition of that particular instance size for that VPC instance and the instances that are using that particular flavor in VPC. The template will give us a link over to the image, which was also discovered as a first-class resource, and we see a little bit more detail here on the discovered image from VPC. All of the other network and storage related artifacts are discovered, and we'll cover those in the later part of the demo when we look at the network and storage managers. We are capturing labels, and we have both name value pair and single valued labels that come in. We're capturing the power state and the key pairs as well for this particular instance. As Adam mentioned, we recently added the ability to do power state management, so we can stop, start, etc. these instances. So we can stop this instance, and then after a while, we run a refresh on it. We can do a reload, and we'll see the power states now. This VM's turned off. That was a recent enhancement to the provider. Of course, when we're showing this to people that are new to the technology, which is often on the IBM side, we like to show off the topology graph, which is a really nice representation of all of the relationships for the cloud manager between the instances and the availability zones, etc. As I mentioned, we also have a network manager. So this is, of course, discovering all of the typical networking resources, networks, subnets, security groups, IP addresses, ports, etc. We don't have network routers right now. That'll be one of the enhancements that we'll make in the next revision of the provider. So if we drill into the networks, we'll see more detail on the networks that are being managed, how many instances are on each network. And drilling further into an individual network, we'll see data on how many subnets each network has. And of course, we can go into a particular subnet, see details on its CIDR range, the number of instances that it's running, the ports that it's managing, etc. And similarly, we can get the network-themed topology view, which shows a lot of the relationships being captured correctly between the subnets and the instances, and of course, the network manager. We also have the storage manager. Right now, we're just capturing the block storage volumes on the VPC. These volumes can be either boot volumes or data volumes, and we're capturing that information in this table view. Of course, we're capturing the size of the block volume. Click into one, and you can see a little bit more detail on a particular volume. And of course, the relationship between the instance or a boot volume that's hosting that volume. And just to kind of follow on to the really awesome demo that Libor just walked through, I added a section that shows the tag mapping for VPC instances as well, using the new tag label mapping that works so well. So this is really just another pass at the demo that Libor just walked through, but we can add a resource label and map into one of our existing categories for the using environment tag category for this particular one. And we'll hop back over to our instance. And we'll see that we have discovered some labels, including an ENV label called test. And right now there are no ManageIQ tags on this instance. Once we kick off the refresh, we'll see the new tag come in from the tag mapping. And this is a really important use case for how we're consuming ManageIQ on the IBM side for us to take advantage of these ManageIQ tags and map them into the cloud provider labels. So that's it for me.
Awesome demo, Chad.
Thanks, Chad. That was great.
Thanks.
All right, and now over to Eugene, who's going to give us an overview of the IBM Terraform provider.
Thanks, Adam. we created a new IBM Terraform provider that basically integrates the ManageIQ and the IBM Terraform service in Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management. Just a few words about what Terraform is. It's actually an open source infrastructure as code software tool. It's created by HashiCorp, and the users can define and provision data center infrastructure using templates, configuration language, either as a HCL or JSON. Next slide, please. So the scope for this IBM Terraform provider initially was to discover and persist a couple of artifacts from IBM Terraform service into ManageIQ inventory. These artifacts are the templates, the Terraform templates, and also the managed virtual machines. We also added a traceability between the VM resources, the managed virtual machines provisioned by the Terraform, and also discovered by ManageIQ. So the users can run data operations for instance, one of the use cases, the users can run the data operations against virtual machines that are provisioned by Terraform. Next slide. Actually, I think I have a demo now. Okay, so let's create we are going to create the configuration manager, and we have now a new flavor, which is IBM Terraform configuration. We have to pick a name, the zone, then we have to specify two URLs. One is the Terraform service URL, and the other one is the auth URL. Then a username and password to connect to the IBM Terraform service. We validate the credentials, and if everything is fine, we just add the configuration manager. Okay, now the validation is successful. We are going to create it. Okay, so we can see the configuration manager being created. We have the type. We see that there are no configuration profiles or configure systems yet. Meanwhile, we can see that on this environment, I actually already pointed to, we discovered VMs from VMware, from vSphere. If we're going back to the also, we can see that the VMs are here. We go back to the configuration profiles. We have to refresh the page. The discovery is still running behind the scene, but it takes only about a couple of seconds. So yeah, right now we can see that templates are actually, or configuration profiles are actually populated in the configuration manager. We can see the name, the description. There are no configured systems yet. We also have an access button that will point us back to we can see the template information in the IBM Terraform service. You can see the template source, where it's located in the GitHub, the parameters. The user can even deploy this template if they want to. Now, going back to the configure systems, now we should be able to see all the managed virtual machines that were deployed through the Terraform, and now they are actually brought into ManageIQ. You can see the name, the IP address, the type, which is the cloud provider, the configuration profile that was used to deploy this service, and also a link back to the virtual machine. As I explained, this virtual machine was already discovered in ManageIQ, so now you can actually run day-to operations like shutdown, restart, and so on. Going back to the configure systems, similar with the configuration profile, we have an access button. Also, right now we can see the configure systems, but we can, going back to the configure systems, we have this access button that is gonna redirect us back to the Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management UI, so we can see the stack details page where this managed virtual machine was deployed. So I think that's all I had.
Very good. Eugene.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Eugene. And that's it for providers. Over to Joe.
Oh, hold on.
No worries. Impressive work in the provider space. It's nice to see. Okay, so in the platform space, there were 42 PRs merged this sprint. A fair bit was cleanup and build-related work, and there were 10 PRs contributed to the Ruby 2.6.6 testing effort. The more noteworthy enhancements were Ansible credentials were rewritten to use DDF, which goes along with form field updates from Angular to React. And a noteworthy documentation enhancement was contributed to the MIQ pods repo for describing how to allow ManageIQ images with Kubernetes. For bugs, one was addressed where using Ansible Runner to run a playbook with an SSH key that had generated on a RHEL 8 machine was failing. And another bug was fixed where invalid role names were being silently ignored. And that's it for the noteworthy PRs on the platform space. On to Alberto.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, so for the API, we had a couple of enhancements and bug fixes. First enhancement by Aliround, where they added support for deleting physical storages. So you see the HTTPD delete verb on the resource, and that we can also do the bulk delete. So that's the standard post signature if we want to do bulk actions on those. So those requests trigger an async request in the background. So you get the normal action result signature with the ID and href of the async tasks created. Next slide, please. Okay, so David added support for Cloud Tenants creates, updates, and deletes. And you see the standard post for the create. As far as edits, we have the edit action with post, as well as put and patch, and delete, the standard delete verb, as well as bulk action for the post for deleting in bulk. Jason fixed the options for API providers so that when we return provider settings and supported providers, we only show the data for supported providers. Next slide, please. Okay, and Libor, we exposed the parameter end date for doing metric rollup, so Libor fixed that. We had an issue where the end date parameter was just not being honored, so it always defaulted to today. So anyway, so that's the standard signature, as you see there, the end date for that, and that's documented in the standard ManageIQ API reference. And that's it for the API. Next slide.
All right, well, and that brings us to a close. The next sprint review is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. I know it's the day before Thanksgiving, but if we move it, it probably means that a subsequent sprint review like 152 will fall on the week between Christmas and New Year's. So we will likely keep this date of November 25th. And I want to thank everyone, including all the people from IBM for helping out and creating this sprint review, and for everyone's contributions. It's really kind of awesome to see the project just move forward on so many different tracks. So thank you very much, everybody, and look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.